Hello and welcome to an introduction to branding. My name's Liz Bolt. Just a little bit about my background. I was buyer for over 13 years at Next and at George and at Boots. And now I am sales marketing director for a China-based company with their own factories called GE Limited. And we sell fashion products, jackets, knitwear, jersey wear into Barbour, Bowden, White Stuff, and many of the companies you can see there on the slide. I also do a lot of business consultancy, working one-to-one with new business startups in the main, and sometimes also with established companies who are looking to diversify or generally just to grow. I also work as a visiting lecturer to a number of universities, working within their fashion schools, teaching the business and branding side, and also at business schools. And you can see some of the universities that I work with on the slide. So today we're going to define what a brand is. Do you currently see yourself as a brand or your business as a brand? Now, if you are producing a product, it's quite likely that already you do see yourself as a brand. But what if you're offering a service and you don't actually have a physical product to offer? What if you offer a service on a freelance basis? Well, you are still a brand. And what is the future of brands? So this quote from Michael Eisner at Disney, "A brand is made up of 1,000 small gestures," is very poignant to me. I think certainly in my industry, in the clothing industry, when we're offering a product, the way we label the product, how our stores look, how the packaging looks, even how our staff, the language we use, it's everything that we do. And this is something you should consider and think about for your own company. And the quote here from the head of Amazon: "Your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room." So now consider, what do you want people to say about? What do you want them to think about? What's the first thoughts you want them to have about your brand? Are you getting that message across? Take a look at these. How many can you instantly recognise just from the image? Take a few minutes to do this. Okay, quite a few there. I'm sure you recognise. The ones that might have got you, which seem to get everybody, is the one on the left-hand side at the bottom there, which is Right Move. We've got Big Brother, we've got Disney, we've got Qantas, got PlayStation, etc. So just, I think for me, interesting how with it's in our brains already. We know that we recognise these, even if they're brands that we don't particularly shop. We can recognise this just by the symbols, which shows how important visuals are. Consider the following brands. What defines them for you? Now, there's no right or wrong answer here, because this is about what you think. What does BMW say to you? Do you see that as high quality engineering? Do you see that as a masculine car? Do you see that as sort of the exec car? And Starbucks, how do you see that? Is that somewhere you shop or somewhere you don't shop? A lot of people say to me, oh, I don't like them, they don't pay their taxes. Or I do like it because it's very recognisable. I know what I'm getting. It may not be the best coffee ever, but at least it's reliable. And Apple, what do you see? When I say the words Apple, do you think of the fruit or do you think of laptops and phones? And do you see that visually? Do you think of the stores? When I think of Apple, I can visualise, the colours come to mind to me, so I think of white and silver. I think of advanced technology. And usually, certainly if I'm lecturing, I see a wall of iMacs. And Marks and Spencer's, what does that say to you? Is that somewhere that your mum shops at or your grandma shops at? Is it something that we buy food and maybe underwear at and nothing else? Do we see that as really not for us? And Nike, is that the first brand you think of when you think of sportswear? And do you think of sporting heroes? So try this with friends and colleagues. Do you have the same thoughts? Are they different? And I think you'll find if you ask different genders, different generations, we'll have different ideas about these brands. What do they say to us? And it might be that one, they may have their marketing wrong if they're not getting that right message across to you, or it's not meant for you. Here are just some of the elements that define brands. So the product design itself and the style. I mean, that could be in cars, that could certainly be in the clothing industry, that could be in jewellery, and particular colours that stand out. And sounds and smells. So Paul Smith uses that it's an old furniture polish smell in every store. It's the price levels. Is it very low price? If we look at Primark, very low price. If we look at Tiffany jewellery, high price for a beautiful item. We can think of the colour. We think of that pale blue colour. We think actually of celebrities, of Audrey Hepburn. And quality and store image. Store image for me is very much the Abercrombie and Fitch stores. It's very much the Apple stores. And what about their PR? And what about celebrity endorsement? Availability of product, or is there a waiting list? And we have clothing brands that particularly rely on running out of stock, that do limited editions, and their credibility and their philosophy and their mission statement. Again, how are you going to relate that to your product or service? If you click on the slide here, you can hear Steve Jobs talking about brands. Have a go. For me, Steve Jobs gets across that values in a brand and how we actually sell those brand values in different ways to different customers, but actually at the heart of it, and as he says at the core of it, those values don't change. It's just the parts of the messages that are relevant for different groups of people, your different customer segments. What I'd like you to do is think about 6 key words that describe your company, your brand. Could you use these in your marketing? Are they too generic? Would your competitors use the same words? Think about what sets you apart. And this will help you when you put together your sales pitch. So ideas could be, sustainable, but that's much used. And very few people will say they're not sustainable. You're a loyal brand. You're serious, you're funny. Have a go with that. Let's have a look at brand value and equity. When you have a headache, what would you immediately think of? Nurofen or Tesco's own brand? Now, look at the price difference. Nurofen, perfectly successful business, selling their product at 8 times as much as Tesco own label. And let's take Coca-Cola. And this is a quote from the Coca-Cola executive. If Coca-Cola were to lose all its factories in a disaster, the company would survive. But contrast that if all consumers were to have a lapse of memory and forget everything related to Coca-Cola, the company would simply go out of business. So with your company, who are you trying to be in the world? Example, you're trying to be the best pizza company ever, the best clothing company for teenagers ever, the best service provider of help for the elderly. What are you trying to be? And what are you committed to? This is where some of those words come in. You're the fastest, the cheapest, the most authentic. What can people count on you for? So draw a mental picture of your ideal customer, or indeed you can draw a little stick man if you want. What problem are you solving for them? What's their perceived notion of how that problem is solved and how others solve it? And what's perhaps your new way? What's your new solution, your new idea, your better idea of how that problem's solved? And by problem here, this can mean finding a product. So this is not necessarily curing something. This is actually, people struggle to find, in my world it might be over 55s struggle to find clothing that they think is appropriate for them. You're perhaps struggling to find vegan food in your local supermarket. Think about what it is that you might be, what is it that your customers come to you for? Moving on to brand identity. Quite often, a brand's identity starts with the name of the person, the design of the craftsperson. And actually, products bearing that name have a certain guarantee, a certain validity. And I've put here some Coco Chanel, Giorgio Armani with his Super Tan and Dolce & Gabbana. What do we think of? We know immediately that gives us some quality, some value, and people buy into that. I think Tiffany is a very good example of how the values and the emotional benefits of a brand really make it. When we look at the functional benefits of this brand, it's offering lovely jewellery, well made, but it's all about the intrinsic values within that brand. The box is recognisable, the colours are recognisable, and it's the value there is in its heritage, in the story behind the brand. Because when we look at the actual product, and I'll do an example here, which would be let's take a silver necklace on a chain. Perfectly well made, perfectly nice. But actually that would retail at £175. We can buy an equally nice looking product without the brand Tiffany, but you'd be paying around £40, £45. But do you feel the same? A brand story and their message is all part of the values, what they're trying to be in the world, who they're trying to be, what they're trying to say to you. And as we saw with the Steve Jobs video, Nike don't actually talk about the product. They don't talk about the technical aspects of the product. It's all about the image. It's all about the values and sporting heroes. Take a look at this series of YouTubes. So we have Nike. And now take a look at this Tinder YouTube. And the advert here for Hugo Boss. Do remember here, they're selling smelly water because that's what perfume is. What does that mean? Is this a product for you? Who are they trying to target? What values do they have here? Who is the person they're trying to attract? I think this is a very strong YouTube advertisement for Nike. And initially, one doesn't even realise it is actually Nike. You'll either love this or you'll hate it. I tend to find this is a real Marmite one. So let's see what you think. Take a few moments to look at these brands below who've gone global and they have problems. What do you think they might be? So let's start with if we start with the Balenciaga bag, I can't remember the retail price of this, 900, 1,000, maybe more. And Balenciaga is very big in Asia. But of course, this was completely rejected by those customers because it looks like one of the cheap laundry bags. And you are certainly not going to pay that price. And Takashimaya made a slight error at Christmas time. And it involved a staircase and the display at the top of the staircase. And they rather confused Father Christmas and Jesus. And what they did is at the top of the staircase, they actually had Father Christmas on a crucifix. This is about 25 years ago. And Barbie in China. These girls they didn't relate. It didn't relate to Chinese children. Now, what do you think's the problem with Postman Pat? Take a few moments to have a think about this one. Is it his hat? Is it his nose? Is it a uniform? Actually, it's to do with his fingers. And as you can see there, he only has 3 fingers and a thumb. What happens if you're in a triad gang? What's the punishment? Finger chopped off. So Postman Pat is part of a triad gang. Have a read of these. So we've got Electrolux, nothing sucks like an Electrolux, didn't quite work. The slang in German for manure is Mist. And Colgate introduced a toothpaste called Q, the same name as notorious porno mag. And this one just makes me laugh. So Ford, when marketing the Pinto in Brazil, didn't quite work because that term in Portuguese means tiny male genitals. So is a brand name important? Actually, we can get over a poor brand name once we get to know that brand. And also we have, like I put an example here, Oasis. You know, Oasis is a drinks brand, a band, a clothing store, a holiday resort. And when Virgin first came out, we were all slightly puzzled. What a strange name to call something a Virgin. Why would you call it Virgin? But we don't, I doubt we even think about it now. And the one I put at the top there, Nova, car in Italy. Nova means no go. Not a great name for a car. So how important is a brand name? It needs to relate to your product and service. It might well be your initials, it might well be your name. But if you're making up a name, just be careful that it's easy to say and that every time you say it, you're not going to have to repeat it and spell it out letter by letter. Because believe me, that can be very, very frustrating. I've worked with a number of companies doing sales marketing for them. And if I've had a particular company where I had to spell it out every time. It wasn't obvious. The problem is that actually leads to the wrong email address being used. So people don't particularly listen. So just give that some thought. Building customer relationships is key. And we know, of course, every consumer is different. Everyone's an individual. But we need to build them together as segments. We need to have our customer segments in order to enable us to market to them as a group. We start to find their likes, their dislikes. And you may well have 2 or 3 different segments for your business. And which one are you going to go for? Are you going to go for the easiest one to reach? Or are you going to go for the most profitable one? But if you've got perhaps a younger audience and a much older audience, the way you speak to them, the marketing channels, the social media platforms that you use, the language you use may need to differ. So consider, who is your target audience or audiences? Who is the message aimed at? What's your core message? And what communication channels are going to work for you? And what's the success factor you're looking for? What response do you want to get? And how are you going to promote your brand? What sort of advertising, PR, sales promotion? Are you going to do personal selling? I've got here a few simple rules to follow. Rule 1, simplify your message. Have one clear action, one clear goal, and stick to it. If you try to do more than one thing, the customer will get confused. The message will be blurred. If you ask them to say, we're this, and we're this, and we're this, they won't follow it. Rule 2. Maintain a consistent visual code across all channels. If you're confused, then your customer definitely is, and confusion kills conversion. So maintaining it can be your packaging, the background that you use in your Instagram shots, your types of photography that you use, that whole look. Get them to recognise that you saw on one of the initial slides, how we just recognise all those brands purely through their visuals. Rule 3. Create clear and appropriate content. Create a brand tone of voice. Use a language that everyone understands. Make sure that your words make sense, particularly to your target audience. And you'll have words that you perhaps consistently use to talk about your brand. Rule 4. Remove unnecessary barriers. Consider what you're asking the customer to do. Could it be done later or through a more applicable channel? How often have you left a website when you've tried to buy something because you're required to give this information, give this information? We move on. We don't have patience. It's a very noisy world out there. And finally, rule 5, reward frequently. Be appreciative. Establish a relationship by rewarding your customers in any way you possibly can. And maybe that is just even a thank you. Building brand authenticity. Storytelling has been something that we've done through generations, but it's very key for brands. And think about, what is your story? The appearing to be artisan, sticking to your roots, loving the doing, the creative process. How have we created our products? How do we create our service? Being immersed in that market, becoming a specialist. And what do you do within your community? Are you at one with your community? And your staff? Are your staff giving that same message when you're not there? Do they relay that to your customers through everything they do? The way they say, the way they tell the story, the way they approach their customers, the service levels. Take a look at this image. Where do you think that is? So usually I get answers like, is it Stratford-on-Avon? Is it somewhere in Oxfordshire? It looks like a quaint English town. And it's actually Shanghai. In Shanghai, it's Thames Town in Shanghai. This is all to do with authenticity. The future of brands. The trust index is the lowest in known time. And we as consumers are taking more control. And we're holding brands accountable. 65% of people expect business to drive social change. And the economy, politics, immigration has left people reeling with uncertainty. And some of the buzzwords going around in brands is responsibility, collaboration, post-consumer, the rent share economy, sustainability, customization. How do these reflect in your brands or your service? And let's look at the Sustainable Development Goals. Which boxes can you tick here? And which ones can you genuinely tick? I doubt you'll be able to do all of them. But what can you do? And actually, you could use this in turn to market your company. And just 8 men control as much wealth as the poorest half of the world's population, roughly 3.6 billion people. Fairly shocking, hey? And the future of brands, millennials and Gen Z. These figures are approximate as they're changing all the time, but we spend 32 years connected, 10 hours a day, 3 hours spent on our phones. 89% get online via phones. Interestingly, 56% are willing to share their location to receive free coupons from a nearby business. 78% more likely to select a brand with a loyalty program. And 96% say value for money is important when selecting where to shop. And Gen Z have 5 devices. We're addicted to our phones. Great for marketeers. And gamification of everything, even for the news. Think about that with your marketing. And finally, I'd like you to enjoy this about how connected we are. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that. If you've got any questions, please do contact me at lizziebolt@gmail.com. Thank you.